the folk of the sea, we put rum in our tea.
We're the folk of the sea, we put rum in our tea.
We got grog in our hands and our feet in the sand.
We got grog in our hands and our feet in the sands. That's what we do, that's why we live. We're a mighty crew until we're on the ground. The ship.
Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew is a 2023 real-time tactics game developed by German studio Mimimi Games, of Shadow Tactics, Blades of the Shogun, and Desperados 3 fame. I covered Desperados 3 way back in 2020 and I liked it quite a lot. In fact, I loved Desperados 3 so much that even back then I knew Mimimi's games would become a fixture of this channel. I knew I'd cover their next game whenever that was supposed to come out. And I was right. I just didn't know it would be the last. Because, you see, 1 month after Shadow Gambit dropped, the studio announced its closure after 15 years of development. The silver lining, of course, is that the studio was in a position to go out on their own terms. Still, I can't help but feel sad about this whole situation because Mimimi was in a league of its own. There's simply no other studio producing RTTs with the same level of production and polish as this studio. Hell, there aren't a lot of studios making RTT in the first place. They are micro-heavy, brutally difficult, and almost all of them feature heavy stealth mechanics. They're not really for everyone, and I swear I'm saying this in the most non-gatekeepy way possible. RTTs are a niche within a niche, and a poorly defined one at that. I don't want to start a real-time tactics discourse, but indulge me for a second. If you look up a list of real-time tactics video games and go to, say, Wikipedia, you'll see games running the entire spectrum of the strategy genre. You'll see traditional RTT games such as Commandos, Desperados, Men of War, jammed together with the likes of Total War and Fallout freaking Tactics. So there's a lot of confusion as to what a real-time tactics game actually is. For me, an RTT is a top-down, character-focused and ability-based tactical game with a strong stealth component. Sounds simple, right? However, Partizan's 1941 doesn't put as big an emphasis on stealth as its peers, and it's still considered an RTT game. So yeah, there's also the fact that real-time stealth tactics game doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, which I'm sure is always a doozy for marketing people. So you could say the studio had everything stacked against them. It's a difficult genre to market and get people to actually play. But you know what makes their closure sting even harder? Shadow Gambit was the first true successful attempt at making this genre accessible without altering its core. So let's delve into Shadow Gambit and see what it's about. Oh, I have a Twitter, I'm not calling it X, and a Patreon where you can support the channel with real-life money. Okay, let's actually go. So right from the get-go, Shadow Gambit sets itself apart from its peers due to its setting. It's neither a western nor a low-key World War II epic set deep behind enemy lines. Shadow Gambit is set in an alternate version of the golden age of piracy, in which a curse has revived the dead and granted them supernatural powers. I'm gonna give you a few snippets to illustrate just what kind of setting this is. Okay, so you got a sentient British lady-voiced ghost ship manned by a literal skeleton crew. 2 giant bored skeletons who pass away the time guarding the ship's stern by scheming and conning the crew. A charming Italian skeleton jester with a suspiciously deep knowledge of the occult. A chain of islands named the Lost Caribbean dotted with magical artifacts, undead outlaws and pirates, and a brutal inquisition movement seeking to hunt down both. A boomtown built in the carcass of a fallen leviathan whose regenerating meat fuels the settlement's economy. Eldritch horrors, and an undead monkey that grants access to the ghost ship's nether realm in exchange for a ghost bananas. This is the kind of craziness we're dealing with here, which makes the main premise of the story seem kinda quaint in comparison. Basically, you, in the form of Afia Manicato, the swashbuckling undead pirate and player insert, are tasked with assembling a cursed pirate crew to explore the Lost Caribbean. Your main objective? Steal magical artifacts and defeat the Inquisition. It's a pretty simple story on the surface, but it goes in some interesting places that I'm not gonna spoil here. Some of these places are sad and others are pretty meta. Let's just say that you stumbled into a leadership position after something happened to the previous captain. You weren't even part of the original crew, as evidenced by you assuming the position of navigator on a ship that navigates itself on account of it being sentient.
And who are ye, if I might ask so myself?
A Fia Manicato, newly hired navigator, at your service.
A navigator, eh? How fares the navigator's work on a stubborn ship like this?
Because RTTs are so mechanically driven, graphics usually take a backseat in favor of visual clarity. You want the player to be able to register the various enemy types and distinguish props from interactable objects at a glance. So you can't make the environments too cluttered. There's also the fact that these games are very save scummy by nature, so you'll spend long stretches of time staring at a fixed point trying to execute the perfect tactical maneuver, which is basically a ticket straight to Headache Town if the game is too visually cluttered. Mimimi has always had a knack for striking a balance between visual utilitarianism, wow, what a word, and eye candy. Shadow Tactics and Desperados 3, for example, look absolutely incredible. They're a textbook case on how to make environments detailed without carpet bombing the player's eyes with visual hodgepodge. On the other hand, Shadow Tactics and Desperados 3 had their settings in their favor. There's only so much graphical detail you can put into Snow Village, Japan and Desert, Mexico. Well, there is that one social stealth level set in a city which is one of the best missions I've ever played. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked. And then you have Shadow Gambit, a game set in a cursed take on the Caribbean islands. This kind of setting, with its lush tropical vistas mixed with horrors beyond human comprehension, basically invites visual clutter. Sorry, too lazy to look up synonyms, but I never felt that's the case in Shadow Gambit. I don't know how else to describe this game, but absolutely gorgeous, especially during nighttime when the intricate shadow and light work kicks in. Yes, there's both day and nighttime variations of maps, but we'll get to that later. I was especially impressed by the water effects, and let me tell you, I haven't been this dazzled by video game water graphics since 2004 when I played the original Far Cry. However, this graphical fidelity came at a cost, as apart from mission intros, Shadow Gambit goes for static visual novel style cutscenes. Not a big deal, as the writing and voice acting are good enough to compensate for the game's presentational limitations, if you can even call them limitations. Let's hear some snippets.
Whew. It's quite a way up here, isn't it?
That is the point. Say, how would you describe the view?
Well, a whole lot of sea.
Is that all?
The horizon has a slight green hue, but that might be the souls swirling around us.
Ah, yes. The Marley's pull is strong today.
Another successful venture. Your expertise does come in handy, Navigator. So, tell me, what draws Aethia Manicato to my captain's legacy?
How dare you, feeble soul? Do you have any idea of the damage you cause?
Why not answer my question then? Is it here?
Of course it is. Why ask what you have already gathered from the entrails of my mind? Greetings! Hey, Pete, look! A skeleton. What does it want? Tobacco back! It wants its tobacco back, Pete. Well, then there's a little we can do.
Even these great foes didn't stand a chance when confronted with my endless cunning.
Wait a minute, Pete. Something's not right here. Huh? It's the poor skeletal fella, and he just wants his tobacco back, right? Yes. Tobacco back?
As good as Shadow Gambit feels, looks and sounds, the real meat is in the gameplay. But first, we gotta address the difficulty. RTTs are difficult games by nature, but not in the way you think. When broken down to its absolute essentials, an RTT is basically a stealth puzzle game. The challenge lies less in surviving the onslaught of enemies which outpower, outgun and outnumber your party by a lot, and more in untangling the mischievous stealth puzzles that the developers put together. It's about identifying weak links and exploiting them, dismantling enemy defenses and taking them down one by one before the enemy has had any chance to even process what hit them. Things like, how do I break up this patrol group without attracting attention? Do I have enough time to take this guy out and drag their body to a bush before their body turns around? And this is why the difficulty settings dictate, amongst age-old video game fixtures like player ammo and health, enemy setups and detection times. Enemy setups determine the number of guards and the density of tougher enemies. We'll address this distinction later in the video. Detection speed is exactly what it suggests. It determines the speed at which enemies will detect your crewmates. I suggest putting this on medium as it provides enough of a challenge while leaving some wiggle room for error for those of us with bad reflexes. On the other hand, the game has a mechanic that effectively nullifies the demands on your reflexes, but again, more on this later. But if you don't want to bother with tweaking the settings, you can just go for one of the pre-made difficulty templates. It's fine, it's your game, you play it however the hell you want. Moving on, because RTTs are very mechanically dense, the developers must invest a lot of effort into the onboarding and ensuring that all the information a player needs is readily available. This means a clean, straightforward UI and good tutorials. I'm happy to report that Mimimi delivers on both fronts. This is by far the easiest RTT to get into, to the point that it makes learning how to play the likes of Commandos feel like sifting through PhD literature. So thanks to the game's great onboarding, it doesn't take long to grasp its basic mechanics. You are a tiny, squishy little undead pirate who has to make their way through a fortress worth of Inquisition soldiers while attracting as little attention as possible. To help you achieve your goal, the game provides you with several tools, either in the form of actual tools like character-specific abilities that we'll discuss later, or environmental knowledge. Take enemy vision cones. Striped for partial vision, filled for full sight. The levels are filled with foliage and buildings that serve as hiding spots for you and enemy bodies. Walking on sand creates footprints which enemies can follow to your hiding spot. Enemies notice missing guards. You can quickly highlight interactables and enemy guards. You can zoom at ground level or way out to get a tactical view of the map. When performing a stealth kill, holding left click has your character immediately grab the enemy to prevent their body from hitting the ground and creating noise. I could easily spend another page listing the game's tiny mechanics, but you get the idea. And while everything I've just listed is enough to make for a half-decent stealth game, there's more to Shadow Gambit than that. So let's talk progression systems. The game's progression basically boils down to unlocking the 8 available crewmates and unlocking their upgrades. As you complete story missions, you will gain Black Pearls and Soul Energy. The currency is needed to revive new crewmates. Each character has their own unique abilities and modifiers. We'll save the former for later. The latter dictates things like whether a character can swim or not swim, climb up vines, and so on. You're free to decide the order in which you unlock characters. Keep in mind that individual missions provide one of each currency, never both. So unlocking a character requires completing 2 missions. So 8 total crewmates times 2 missions equals a whopping 16 missions to unlock the full roster. And while this fragmented progression might sound bad, it makes sense for reasons I'll explain later. Each of these characters has an extra power that you unlock by gaining another currency called Vigor. As you complete missions, a Vigor bar fills up, and when it's stopped, you can unlock a new upgrade. This gives a massive boost to an existing character power and can really change the way you play. For example, Pincus has an ability that lets you take over enemies and walk freely amongst them. Its initial form allows you to possess only basic enemies, while its upgraded version works on tougher enemies. All of the above takes place on the Marley, the sentient ghost ship I mentioned earlier. The Marley is kind of a hub area between missions. The Marley is also where you pursue side quests, which are totally optional but kind of fun, talk to crewmates, and launch missions. Which takes us to the final gameplay section of this video, which is gonna address everything stealth, combat, and game design related in one big pile, as these things are essentially linked together. So Shadow Gambit is mission based. From the mission select screen we can pick the islands that are available to us, see what missions are available, set a difficulty for that mission, and pick the characters. Unlike Desperados 3, which allowed up to 5 characters in a mission, Shadow Gambit, with some exceptions, features 3-man missions. Once you choose a mission and your characters, you'll be able to pick a landing spot to start the mission from. While in the first couple missions or so the landing spot is essentially pre-selected as there's only one available, later you'll be able to pick from a few different ones. Each landing spot has its own benefits and detriments, like a landing spot being lightly guarded but farther away from the main objective, that sort of thing. I like this feature quite a lot, especially from a thematic standpoint, as it fits the game's jolly band of undead pirates pulling a heist theme. With the party composition and landing spot selected, you're finally free to actually complete the mission. As I said earlier, mission objectives usually involve obtaining the required currency to unlock new crewmates. While the devs did make an effort to sprinkle some narrative flavor on top of the mission objectives, they basically boil down to get Black Pearl or get Soul Energy. In some cases, missions are straightforward and involve simply sneaking and backstabbing your way to the target's location, while in others, they're more convoluted, like the one with the mischievous ghost twins that had me blowing up the Inquisition's rum storage in exchange for soul energy. Unlike Shadow Tactics and Desperados 3, which feature linear mission-by-mission progression, Shadow Gambit allows you to tackle the game's islands and missions in whichever order you want. Also, you will visit each island multiple times for different missions. Not only that, but depending on the mission you choose, there can be night or day. At night, it's easier to hide and sneak as guard vision cones are predominantly striped, which renders you effectively invisible as long as you're crouched. You can also create pockets of darkness by extinguishing torches. Pretty basic stuff, but it can really shake up the way you play. However, regardless of the time of day or the mission objective, the layout and the setup of the guards on a given island is exactly the same. This creates a major problem in that once you figure out how to dismantle defenses in a certain area, well, you're pretty much done. The solution will always be the same as the guard layout and setup is static across missions. This, coupled with low enemy variety, can make Shadow Gambit feel a bit repetitive. That said, I believe this was the right call, at least within the overall design philosophy Mimimi employed with Shadow Gambit. Why? Because Shadow Gambit is a sandbox, meaning the fun lies less in achieving your goal and more in how you achieve it. Meaning the crazy permutations of abilities, crew members, and tactical choices that you can cook up to achieve your goal is the fun. In that regard, Shadow Gambit provides a crazy variety of options in the form of the 8 crew members that you unlock throughout the game's 30 or so hour campaign. Now, the undead pirate theme allowed Mimimi to do some pretty crazy shit in terms of character design, so let's do a quick roundup of the crew members. Afia Manikato, the main character, comes equipped with a designer-style blink power as well as the ability to freeze an enemy temporarily. She also uses her chest as a sword sheath, which is pretty badass to be honest. Suleidi, the ship's designated plant lady, can spawn a bush out of thin air, providing cover for your party and a reliable hiding spot to hide bodies. A reliable hiding spot to hide bodies. Great job, Mark. It's important to note that bodies hidden in bushes disappear instantly, so a good tactic would be to have one crewmate attack a guard and order Suleidi to spawn a bush on top of them as the first crewmate is performing the stealth takedown. Teresa La Ciega is your sharpshooter. Her crossbow is incredibly powerful and relatively quiet, making Teresa ideal to pick off that one guard to clear the path for your crewmates. Emphasis on that one guard, as Teresa's crossbow only carries one bolt, which she has to physically recover after each use. She also has an unlimited supply of non-lethal bolts that temporarily limits an enemy's vision cone, allowing other crewmates to sneak past or go for the kill. Pinkas von Presswald, the ship's self-described aristocrat and intellectual, is one of the best characters in the game. He can take over the minds of guards and wander around freely within a limited range, starting from the point where you possess the guard. The cool thing is that you can jump from body to body, allowing you to clear huge stretches of the map before your other crewmates even had a chance to do anything. Pinkas also has not one, but 2 distraction techniques, a coin that attracts guard attention to the spot it landed on, and the ability to strike up conversations with guards while disguised. Kael Lebris is the ship's canoness. She has, by far, the funniest special ability. Basically, she can load downed guards and crewmates into her cannon and launch them at others. This is literally silent era slapstick comedy territory. Also, her distraction technique is a firecracker. Way less flashy than a freaking human shooting cannon, but it does the job alright. Next up is Quinton Albers, a, let's say, passionate treasure hunter that excels in luring and disappearing guards. Dude is so obsessed with treasure that he literally encased his own skull in gold, which he uses to draw guards. He also has a fishing pole, which is useful for activating switches, pulling down ladders, relocating teammates, and unleashing environmental hazards from a distance. Toya of Iga, ostensibly the ship's designated cook, does anything but cooking. He's a freaking pirate ninja. His main ability, Katashiro, spawns a small paper charm that can be pinned on enemies. The secondary ability, Shadow Step, teleports Iga to the location of the Katashiro. All enemies marked by the Katashiro are attacked instantly. Last but not least, John Hughes Mercury. Where do I even start with this fella? He's a jolly Scottish lad who likes to drink, eat, sing, dance, and hang out with his fish companion, Sir Reginald. John is arguably the most powerful character in this freaking game. With his main ability, called Soul Diver, John can use his anchor to open a portal to the below and hide there for eternity. But here's the catch. He can also emerge through the portal, jolt the anchor up, yeet an enemy guard and hide their body and the below in one move. Doesn't matter if the guard is moving or stationary. Also, he can do this for as many times as he wants. The only limit is the cooldown, which is very short all things considered. Now, the sheer creative craziness of these characters make it hard to return to any stealth tactics games, and the fact that they achieved this level of gameplay variety with 8 characters is a remarkable feat of game design on its own. Obviously, you're free to experiment and figure out synergies between characters at your own pace. The missions are designed in such a way that not one party composition is ideal. All of them are valid. Though, you might make your life harder if your crew selection lacks certain abilities, like say, the ability to make stationary guards leave their posts, in which case the game is kind enough to warn you before starting the mission. It's also a good idea to consider the location before choosing your crew. For example, if the mission takes you to the docks, you might want to bring at least a crew member who can swim. I know, pirates who can't swim, ridiculous, but you know, give them a break, they're undead. Now, one of my biggest gaming sins, so to speak, is my tendency to fall into a familiar playstyle and stick with it for the duration of the game. This habit is why on every Deus Ex run, I make a conscious effort to leave that sword behind. You know what sword I'm talking about. Well, not here. That's because Shadow Gambit has a system to prevent players from sticking to the same crew composition. Remember the Vigor bar I mentioned like 5 years ago? Well, each crew member nets a certain amount of points, and the more they've been out of rotation, the more bonus points you get when you decide to bring them along. This is such a simple and effective system to encourage players to actually experience the variety of play the game offers. Were it not for this system, I can absolutely 100% guarantee you I would have limited myself to 3, maybe 4 crew members and ignore the rest. I'm not sure how unique this system is, I definitely don't recall seeing it in other games, so feel free to drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious if other games have it. So remember when I said that Shadow Gambit has a mechanic that basically eliminates the requirement to have good reflexes? Enter Shadow Mode. This feature is not unique to Shadow Gambit, as previous Mimimi titles also had it. It was called Showdown Mode in Desperados 3 and Shadow Mode in Shadow Tactics. Anyways, Shadow Mode is basically a command queuing system that allows you to plan and execute complex strategies. You enter Shadow Mode, which pauses the game, give an order to each of your crew, unpause, and watch the strategy that you'd meticulously planned play out as your crew members use their powers at once. It's absolutely glorious and, except in a few specific cases, entirely optional. Take Commissars. This is an enemy type smack dab in the middle of regular guards and prognosticars. Distraction techniques are less effective on commissars than on regular guards. For example, Pincus's coin will distract their attention only for a very brief time, not enough to execute a tactical maneuver in real time. So what you can do is enter Shadow Mode, order Pincus to toss the coin, and then order another crewmate to do whatever you want them to do. Or take the Kindred, a pair of psychically linked monks. If one is killed, the other will be alarmed and revive their counterpart, so they need to be taken out at the same time. If you're an old geezer with bad reflexes like me, Shadow Mode is your best bet at eliminating them and avoiding detection. By the way, don't be afraid to go crazy and try out new stuff, as Shadow Gambit has another mechanic that encourages experimentation and variety. You might have caught glimpses of it by now. I'm talking, of course, about the memory system. It's basically quick loading and quick saving, but in a brilliant move, Mimimi tied it into the narrative. Essentially, the Marley, the ghost ship, stores memories which the crew can access whenever they screw up. It also explains how the crew has been so successful in their exploits and why the Grand Inquisitor is after them, but that's besides the point. So, because quick saving and quick loading is baked into the narrative, players have less of a reason to feel guilty about quote-unquote safe scumming. And that's pretty much it. Shadow Gambit is a glorious follow-up to Desperados 3 and arguably the best RTT game ever made. It's so charming and ridiculously creative. It feels like what Mimimi in particular and the RTT genre in general has been building up to in the last decades. I am sad that this was their final game, but on the other hand, it's better to go out with a bang. There's a not insignificant chance that Mimimi took a long look at Shadow Gambit and said, "This is literally our magnum opus. Nothing we will do in the future will top this." And you know what? I can totally get that. So please buy this game and play it. I promise you'll have a blast. Thanks for watching. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons whose generosity makes these videos possible. I'll see you next time.